One of the more interesting pieces of information I've seen regarding the war in Iran and what's actually happening in the White House actually came from Tucker Carlson saying people are feeding Trump information that the war is 90% popular and 10% unpopular. And so that obviously begs the question of who's feeding him this information, right? I think we as Americans have to understand Donald Trump is a figurehead at this point. Donald Trump is not the one driving policy, right? The people driving policy to me fall into at least three groups, those being, Israel and the AIPAC lobby, the techno-fascists, and the Christian nationalists, right? And all three of those people have vested interest in seeing kind of this war in Iraq in a more kind of smaller zone, and then just global chaos in a larger zone, right? Israel, obvious reasons for war with Iran. Christian nationalism, obviously they want to usher in the apocalypse so that Jesus will come back. I guess violence is what Jesus loves. It's totally crazy. But the techno-fascists are the kind of ones to me that are actually the most dangerous because they're permanent. They're acquiring like globally destabilizing levels of wealth. They're in control of globally destabilizing like pieces of technology that are basically resetting the board. And so everything we're looking at, we kind of have to see through the lens of who this is benefiting outside of Trump. Trump is just making tons of money and spouting off his bullshit and getting to collect all of the attention and feed his narcissistic supply and all of this stuff. But I wanted to read a passage, and I'd been reading this, for the years leading up to this past election, warning about what would happen if Trump got reelected, imploring people that there was an actual choice, that the internet brain rot idea of everything is the same didn't actually apply to this position. I would ask people if they really think Kamala Harris would have gone into Iran. And if you could vote to not go into Iran or go into Iran, if that's happening in a vacuum, would you do that? But so this comes from the book, The End of Reality, How 4 Billionaires Are Selling a Fantasy Future of the Metaverse, Mars, and Crypto by Jonathan Taplin. I think it was written in like 2021 or 2022. And, to me, we're actually living in a world destabilized by social media, that the shift in information systems, that technology, the internet, social media, smartphones have ushered in has completely destabilized our economic systems, our political systems, and our cultural systems intentionally, right? That one of the things the Epstein file showed was Epstein as a cultural engineer, as a social engineer, as that reality is shaped online now. And all of these sorts of people are controlling reality online and trying to drive that fake reality offline, right? Trump and his administration should be viewed as content creators. That's what they are. They're creating content to create an alternate reality to invite their cult to live into it. Any relationship with a narcissist begins as a shared fantasy. They're all living in this shared fantasy. That's part of the problem with this war, is that it's in this fantasy version of reality where America is this unrivaled military power that can never be beaten, where, it's really dangerous, right, to be operating out of here. But here's the quote and the kind of passage about Peter Thiel. The disruptive power of social media was why Thiel so valued his position as Facebook's senior board member. Steve Bannon, who worked with Thiel on the Trump transition team in 2016, said, quote, Peter's idea of disrupting government is out there. People thought Trump was a disruptor. They had no earthly idea what was being pitched by Thiel, end quote. For instance, both candidates he identified to run the Food and Drug Administration, his Silicon Valley associates Jim O'Neill or Balaji Srinivasan, argued that the agency should dump its requirement that drugs be proven effective before reaching market. Bannon and Thiel instrumentalized Facebook for Trump's regime by using a new form of propaganda. Bannon said, quote, the Democrats don't matter. The real opposition is the media, and the way to deal with them is to flood the zone with shit, end quote. The idea was not to convince people of a specific policy point, but to overwhelm them with disinformation to such an extent that they became disoriented and reality lost all meaning. We're there, obviously. For many citizens, it was not a matter of denying the truth, but rather a deep weariness that the truth was even knowable. And of course, the new AI-driven ChatGPT will make it even easier to flood the zone. The New York Times' Ezra Klein notes, quote, and what unnerved me a bit about ChatGPT was the sense that we are going to drive the cost of bullshit to zero when we have not driven the cost of truthful or accurate or knowledge-advancing information lower at all, end quote. Of course, Bannon didn't invent this strategy. Dictators, starting with Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini, have refined it over the years. But Thiel realized with Bannon's help that it was no longer sufficient to proclaim, quote, liberty as your movement's North Star. You needed coercive state power to achieve your goals on immigration, banning abortion and pornography, and stopping the woke revolution around Black and LGBTQ social justice reform. But as British historian Jeff Ely points out, the fascism of 2022, quote, no longer relies as much on street fighting, pitched confrontations, imposing displays, of paramilitary strength and the spectacle of uniformed massed force, it operates rather by verbal onslaughts, internet trolling, instantly produced and transmitted visual incitements, and all the other virtual means of displaced but no less brutal assault, end quote. This is Bannon and Thiel's specialty, aided, of course, by Zuckerberg's Facebook and Musk's Twitter. John Gans, an American writer for The New Statesman, says Thiel is, quote, probably the most clearly fascist prominent figure in the USA today, including Trump, end quote. Thiel has had an apocalyptic vision, one that assumed getting people to come over to his view of the future would take a backlash against globalization and a financial catastrophe. As the global economy began to melt down in 2008, he wrote, quote, the entire human order could unravel in a relentless escalation of violence, famine, disease, war, and death, end quote. For the next 8 years, Thiel railed against the Obama administration. By 2015, he grasped that Trump could be the vehicle to bring on the end times he so desired, and he realized that Facebook could be an ideal megaphone for Trump's American carnage vision. Curtis Yarvin, one of Peter Thiel's favorite bloggers, wrote that some people are, quote, more suited to slavery, end quote, than others. Yarvin leads the neo-reactionary movement, whose adherents believe that American democracy is a failed experiment and should be replaced by a monarchy, with the ruler similar to the CEO of a corporation. Though Thiel might not be willing to go that far publicly, Yarvin believed he had convinced Thiel that libertarianism was a doomed project without the inclusion of authoritarianism. He argued, quote, we should get over our dictator phobia, end quote. After Thiel said that Republican members of Congress who voted for Trump's impeachment after the January 6 attacks were traitorous, Yarvin noted of Thiel, quote, he's fully enlightened, but just plays it very carefully, end quote. Looking forward to the 2024 election, Yarvin believes the Republican candidate, Trump or a Trump clone, should campaign on a specific mandate. If I'm elected, I'm going to assume power in Washington and rebuild the government. Once that's done, Yarvin believes elite institutions like Harvard and the New York Times need to be closed down, and then we nationalize all local police and National Guard troops. Yarvin's law and order prescriptions are simple. A trivial database query can identify the set of humans in the country who are either A, productively employed, B, independently wealthy, or C, a well-supervised dependent of A or B. Everyone else, including all minors, gets the tag. The inconspicuous device fits on your ankle and continuously reports your position to the authorities. If no crimes are committed near your location, you have nothing to worry about. Saddled with a large number of residents who are effectively dependents of the state, for example, those who receive housing subsidies. These people need to be reprocessed to determine whether they can become members of productive society, and during this time there is no reason to leave them where they are. Therefore, we can expect to establish secure relocation centers in which the 20th century's artificially decivilized subpopulations will receive social services in a controlled environment while they are reintroduced to civilized society. And so Peter Thiel owns J.D. Vance, literally owns him. J.D. Vance is a creation of Peter Thiel. He created J.D. Vance as a political figure, and he unquestionably bought J.D. Vance's position on the ticket in 2024. J.D. Vance was a historically bad vice president campaign, according to his approval numbers, and yet he was still chosen. To me, there was a quid pro quo there, that Donald Trump essentially sold the government to various parties, one of them being Peter Thiel. And so we all should be really scared. This is obviously no joke. They're building relocation centers all over the place. They're constructing a surveillance police state right in front of our eyes while we're arguing over whatever the kind of media tells us and their hour-long news cycles is the thing we should be arguing over. And, you know, to kind of view Donald Trump as the end-all and be-all of our problems is incredibly short-sighted and at this point in history a dangerous position to take.